Hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us. Folks are finding their way in. This is DEI as a business imperative, driving success in the age of innovation. So if that's the event you're looking for, you're in the right place. Give folks a few minutes here to make their way into the room. As you're coming in, do me a favor, find that chat window and drop a note in there about where you're joining us from today. So my name is Matt Pittman. I'm a principal analyst with Brandon Hall Group, and I am in sunny, warm, humid South Florida. And I just sent that to the panel, so that's awesome. Right. New Mexico. See Mumbai, California, Texas, North Carolina. Hey, Stacy, I've seen you on several sessions. Nepal, London, Bristol, UK. Awesome. Welcome. Kelly, someone else in Toronto. Excellent. Excellent. Well, we are really glad to have you here this morning or evening or whatever time it is. My name is Matt Pittman, principal analyst with Brandon Hall Group. You are joining DEI as a business imperative, driving success in the age of innovation. It's my pleasure to be your host this afternoon. I would love to take a minute to introduce our distinguished panel that will be leading our conversation today. Kelly Lake, we'll start with you. Kelly Lake is the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at EI. As a respected thought leader in the learning and performance industry, she brings 30 years of global experience in learning and performance strategy, workforce enablement, learning and performance ecosystems, global performance transformation, immersive learning, and performance innovation. She has a successful track record of creating learning strategies and maximizing ROI for Fortune 1000 companies, resulting in performance and business optimization to enhance client and organizational business success. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you, Matt.
And I'm also pleased to next introduce Hanif Fazal. Hanif brings an extensive track record spanning 2 decades in guiding equity and inclusion processes within corporate, governmental, philanthropic, and nonprofit sectors. In his capacity as co-founder and managing partner of the Center for Equity and Inclusion, Hanif has been instrumental in driving transformative change. He has led organizations nationwide in the integration of diversity, equity, and inclusion principles into their organization values, culture, and operational frameworks. As a trusted advisor to C-suite and senior executives, he adeptly navigates the intricate balance between optimizing business interests and cultivating a robust, inclusive organizational culture. Known for his compelling authenticity and deep knowledge, Hanif has been a sought-after keynote speaker, trainer, and facilitator. His inaugural publication, An Other World, stands as a testament to his unwavering commitment to advancing discourse on crucial societal matters. Welcome, Hanif. We're glad to have you today.
Thank you.
And next, I'm pleased to introduce Merlin Pope III, president of Pope Consulting. Merlin's upbringing was steeped in discussions around diversity and inclusion thanks to his parents, Merlin Jr. and Patricia, trailblazers in the DEI realm. These early conversations laid the foundation that would later guide his career path. Merlin spent 15 years gaining invaluable insights in corporate America, equipping him with the perspective and experience necessary to make a meaningful impact in the field. Merlin now collaborates closely with clients to elevate their organizational cultures through DEI strategies that not only address immediate needs, but also pave the way for long-term sustainable inclusion across the organization. Welcome, Merlin.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Matt.
And we're really excited to have you guys with us. And I should mention all 3 organizations are Brandon Hall Group Award winners. And so we're very proud to partner with you on this journey. And we, of course, want to thank our webinar sponsor, EI, powered by MPS. EI is an emotionally intelligent learning experience design company that partners with customers in their digital transformation journey. They have over 3 decades of experience in designing learning and performance support solutions that drive performance gain and maximize training, both ROI and ROE. They deliver high impact learning solutions that drive deeper and more meaningful learner engagement, enable effective upskilling, and improve employee performance, and create a high ROI for the business and organization. From strategy to development to delivery to measurement, they work with their customers to ensure training investments deliver business results. Our thanks to EI. We encourage you to visit them at their website. Couple of more quick housekeeping items. If you are new to Brandon Hall Group webinars, Brandon Hall Group works with organizations to ensure excellence across the HCM spectrum. We do that in a variety of ways, including our research memberships, our Enterprise Excellence Certification Program, our Preferred Provider Coverage Program, but we're probably best known for our Excellence Awards. And one of the top recognition for learning and HCM practices in the industry. At the core of what we do is our research studies, and we always have studies open that you can find by going to our website and clicking on Open Studies. And we will be launching our learning and development benchmarking study for 2024 within the next couple of weeks, so be on the lookout for that as well. Lastly, of course, this is a Zoom call. It isn't meant to be an interactive experience. You've already found the chat window and are making good use of it. Please feel free to keep that going as we continue on our session. In fact, it would be really interesting to know if you would take a second and pop in that chat. What is your role in the organization relative to this topic today? What is it that you what role is it that you play relative to DEI? If you would just let us know that in the chat, that would be awesome. We are also going to reserve time at the end of our session today for Q&A with the panelists. So find that Q&A panel and feel free to submit your questions as we go through. We will hold all of those to the end of our time together today. And speaking of that, you'll want to stick around because we will be raffling off a $100 Amazon gift card to someone who is present on the call at the time. So you might be a winner. You never know. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to jump right in here and talk a little bit about the current state of DEI. Then we're going to move to talking about overcoming DEI resistance, implementing the right approach, and then look at DEI and learning strategy. Then we'll finish up with our Q&A. And with that, let's jump right into the current state of DEI. And we're going to kick things off today with a polling question. So Shay Salvato, my colleague from Brandon Hall Group, is on with us today, and she's going to launch this poll. We want to know, what are the highest priority for your organization's DEI strategy this year? Now, we recognize that all of these things are important in their own right, and all may be a part of the plan, but we'd like to know what's most important to your organization. So if you'll take a minute and respond to the poll question, and we will take a look at those responses here in the next few minutes. Shay, feel free to flip that when you feel like we've got a good percentage. And while that's coming up, looks like we've got a lot of different seats in the audience today. Everything from trainers and social media to DEI leads and leaders who are parts of DEI initiatives. So we've got a nice diverse crowd to talk with today. All right, Shay, let's take a look at those results. All right, increased use of data analytics to understand the impact of, oh, that cut off, hold on 1 second, sorry. Increased use of data analytics to understand the impact of a healthy DEI culture on business outcomes. I love that one personally. I know Kelly does too. The use of data can be really powerful. And then focus on building targeted development for underrepresented groups follows pretty close behind that. So panel, any initial reactions to those priorities? Surprises or feels right to you?
Matt, I'll just follow back up with what you just said in regards to the data analytics, right on what we thought that we would hear back. I think it's really important, and also how data analytics are being used. So it's great validation. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. So some other quick data points that I'd like to share. We have been studying organizations' responses to DEI for several years at Brandon Hall Group. And in our most recent study on the business impact of DEI, we asked organizations to rate what needed improvement in their organizations. And I think you're going to see some consistency here. So the top 5 from that study, consistently using metrics for DEI, understanding the business need for DEI, which is exactly what we're doing here today, a well-developed approach to change management, a comprehensive organization-wide approach, and then a framework for winning the support from stakeholders, common themes, common challenges for organizations. And then we asked in our HCM Outlook study for 2024, what level of investment are you planning in your DEI strategies for this year? And by far and away, most organizations are looking at how do we embed the values of DEI across the organization, and then creating mentorship programs for diverse employees, leader accountability for DEI, targeted development of people in underrepresented groups, common theme to our poll response, and technology to assist with DEI efforts. Other areas that showed up as planned investment areas that were DEI adjacent, I would call it, diverse hiring, improving diversity of the leadership pipeline, and fostering an inclusive workplace. So we know that the current state of DEI is that it is still top of mind for organizations and individuals. And with that, I'd like to invite our panel now to begin to share their insights and expertise. And I'd like to start with you, Merlin, if I could. What is your view of DEI in our current climate?
Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here with you all today. Certainly we're seeing some backlash or resistance to DEI in the current climate. And I'm not too surprised by the backlash at all. History shows that whenever the status quo is challenged in a meaningful way, there's going to be some level of resistance or backlash to that. And despite these headwinds, we're incredibly optimistic about the future. And one of the reasons for our optimism is related to the generational shift that we're seeing in the workplace. Very soon, Gen Z will represent nearly 40% of the global workforce. And, our organization has the opportunity to do a lot of focus group and survey studies with organizations of all different sizes across many different industries. And one of the clear and consistent themes that we see from that data analysis is Gen Z is very clear about the type of workplace they want to work in. They want to work for organizations that have taken an equity lens to the infrastructure, meaning they've looked at the systems, processes, and practices through an equity lens. And they want to work in an environment where they feel included and supported. And here's the key thing. They want to feel included and supported without feeling as though they have to give up key parts of themselves in order to receive that inclusion. And so, regardless of the environment, we understand that DEI is done in connection with others, and we're happy to be a part of the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. And Hanif, for you, Merlin mentioned backlash and resistance. Why do you think there is such a reluctance toward DEI?
It's so funny. I was literally on a basketball court last night. There's a game I play with a group of guys, and when we're warming up, one of the people who knows what I did came up and said, "Hey, I know her, how are you guys doing? Like, there's so much there's so much like resistance around all this stuff. Like, are you guys surviving as a business, that?" And I was like, when it hits the basketball courts, we have now really experienced people experiencing the resistance. So, I think there's a number of reasons why we're seeing backlash, or was excuse me, like reluctance, I think, around D&I. And for one, I'm not sure from the beginning if leaders really built an authentic connection to D&I. And I often saw that over the last 10 years in particular, when organizations jumped into D&I, it often was out of a sense of obligation or even a sense of social or political pressure, one way to do it. And I feel like that's really on one level really critical, because I feel like when D&I will surface issues that are going to require a level of boldness, passion, will, that I think you only are going to find if you really care about something. And certainly the businesses that I'm working with or that we're working with that are really doing meaningful D&I work, almost always I will find leadership at the top of an organization that truly cares. It's like finds a personal value in it. So on one hand, I'm not always sure if there has always been the level of personalization. On the flip of that coin, I've also seen loud and clear that business leaders are still having trouble even articulating the business case for D&I. Like, how does like one, just being able to even clearly define what does equity and inclusion actually mean? How does it live in my organization, both culturally, operationally, and how we provide services? And then, as importantly as any of that, how does this D&I actually make my business better? And that kind of inability to both name what, the personal value, the name kind of the organizational value. And then in a climate where in any direction that you step, if you're really pro D&I, there's going to be backlash. If you're kind of more conservative or want to move more incrementally around it, there's, backlash, one way, or it can be even internally, even I do this work and just keeping up with the acronyms. Like, I'm worried, am I going to get the acronym right? Like, it shifts it seems like every single week. So just the
Right.
language. So I think leaders have really struggled in a lot of ways. And then finally, I'll just say that uh, there has been a real organization, strategy, and resource behind anti-D&I efforts that have had leader after leader, I think, about real litigation, being caught up in litigation. I was just in Park City, and there was someone who came up and said, "Hey, I really wanted to get into a workshop you were doing. I was doing for kind of community-wide stakeholders." And they were like, "I had to change the name of uh, your workshop in the application because in Utah, the state has legislated against any race-based initiatives that are getting state funding." And so when you think about now, litigation, legislation, and then you think about leaders who then don't necessarily feel either personally connected or can articulate it one way or the other, what you're going to see is, I think, just overall trepidation. And I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing.
Yeah, and that, so much intensity there. Kelly, we know that that's what's happening here in the States. Is there a difference in how DEI is prioritized in European countries?
Definitely. First, let me thank our two panelists, our two experts here. They're our strategic partners, and I am so grateful for them both being here on the call today to help share with our participants, a little bit more in depth than maybe what you might just have a basic understanding of. So thank you both so very much. I will say, tends to be most people think of DEI as an American issue, but it's not the case. DEI is so important across the board, across the world. When we talk about international understandings about DEI, it really level sets a little bit of some of the areas that we may not know about. So let me give you just a little bit of example. And age tends to be, a primary focus in Eastern Europe and also the Middle East. In Latin America, it tends to be disability. When it's APAC or more Asian Pacific companies, it tends to be company culture, which makes sense. And in Western Europe, Africa and even North America, gender usually tends to be a top priority. So there's a different approach when we hear about things from a holistic perspective internationally, right? There are studies out there that say Norway, is the most inclusive country to work with, and the US and Brazil are very close with that. And Sweden and the Netherlands, also Canada, I mean, very much carry a strong suit of DEI initiatives and are well known for that. But it's a different, when you're looking at organizations that are in countries that have an older culture, right? So that may only have a monoculture as opposed like Europe or Asia, where it's a consistent understanding of their culture and generational how that's going to move forward, as opposed to like the US and the UK, where you have multicultural. And this is a different understanding across the board of when you have a culture that is inclusive, and it results in more exposures to that. So I think we need to keep that in mind today as we're going through hearing the different things, because we put on a different lens. We have to look at
Right.
things differently, not always what affects us, but how everybody else and different international organizations are looking at things.
Right. And so it really comes down to, what are we to do with all of this struggle and this challenge? How do we overcome that resistance? So, Hanif, I'd like to come back to you for this to start. How do we overcome some of these obstacles that we're discussing?
You know, the first thing I think maybe when I'm working with organizations around how to engage this work, I think is just pulling back almost on the balcony and saying like, hey, how are we even viewing D&I? And I think it's really important that oftentimes I'm working with business leaders who see D&I as a tool to fix something, and then as soon as that particular issue is fixed within the organization, it's done and over with. And one thing I just think it's important for organizations to begin to think about D&I as an ongoing process, one that continues to help organizations iterate and evolve. I often think about it like digital. If I think about, from .com and the shift to, email and internet, and then, onward to how we collect data and to now AI, all that, like digital technology is something that is constantly there and constantly evolves how we do business. And one way I think we should think about D&I that way. It's just something that we need to be consistently resourcing, and think of it as something that is just a part of evolving consistently how we do work. So I think on one hand, it is just how we think about it. I do think that it is so important for us to be thinking about how we build the capacity of leaders and key stakeholders within the organization, and really targeting their ability to not just personalize and articulate their commitment to it or what it means, but also what is their particular role? How do they operationalize within their role? What does accountability mean to D&I within their role? And spending I think oftentimes not just kind of the social learning around what D&I is and why we're here, but what it actually means and how I actually apply D&I principles into the scope of work. And then finally, I think too often I see organizations jump into D&I in a reactive manner. And while I think we want to be really responsive and move quickly when it comes to D&I, I also think there's real room for us to be really strategic and think about, how do we want to organize our efforts? What is a plan that really fundamentally addresses the cultural issues that we want to transform or make shifts culturally? How do we make sure this is really impacting how we operationalize? And then, of course, how we then serve. And so I think that kind of strategic plan as a foundation, built with leaders who really get why we're doing this and understand their role in it and understand the long-term outreach. I think this is the beginning of like the foundation of how you address it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I love that idea of capacity building and continuing to grow that. Merlin, let me ask you, how should organizations approach DEI growth and requirements? Is there an approach that stands out from your perspective?
The organizations that we see achieve meaningful and sustainable impact over time generally have, three principles in common. Certainly one is related to what Hanif just mentioned in terms of the leadership mindset. They understand that this is going to be an ongoing process. DEI is not something that can be accomplished in a quarter or a fiscal year. It's an ongoing thing, and there's going to be adjustments that are made during that process. The second thing is they understand the importance of assessing the current state of the organization. So they do a baseline assessment, they identify the strengths of the culture, the opportunity areas, and specifically the barriers to inclusion that some individuals may be facing because of their background or identity. And they use that collective information to build a strategy that is tailored towards the needs of their organization. The other really neat thing that the assessment does for these organizations is, from a learning perspective, it helps to highlight the learning gaps that exist within the organization And then as you build out the learning journey, you can be very specific and customize the learning pathway specific to the needs of the organization. And then last but not least, these organizations have a heavy focus on middle management. Middle management represents the bridge from strategy to execution. Middle managers typically have the most interactions with the broadest amount of people on a daily basis, and they typically have the most diversity within their teams. So organizations that invest in creating inclusive managers generally will have a workforce that feels included and supported.
That's a great point. Those middle managers really do make or break the day-to-day experience in the organization. Kelly, as you listen to this, how are organizations adjusting globally? Are the approaches differing from what you're hearing in the US?
I think, if we took a step back, and I think both points, both of our panels, excellent points. But if we take a look globally, we're seeing a projected spend of $15 billion by 2026. And that's from a McKinsey report on DEI initiatives. So that's kind of validating a little bit the prioritization across the board, what's important. But, as we all know, issues of bias and discrimination can be found anywhere, obviously. And when it comes to most reports that we're seeing, it tends to be US based, but it's really important for all locations for a globalization perspective. So we have so many different companies that have locations all across the world, and how are you standardizing that? How are you rolling this out to different locations, especially those that are so diverse? And as we know, one size does not fit all in this type of approach. So we have to look at the particular company culture, and it is different. It's different based upon, where the employees or the workers are located, and also that particular culture. And that's where a lot of the challenges come into it. But, if we take a look at this from an international perspective, I think it's really important to understand that, what may work in the United States will not work in India, so that there's the things that international organizations really need to take in consideration, and how to strategically step back and work towards a goal that's, relevant. How much time are they spending on collecting data for the different locations, the different cultures? How are they working to take a look at that? Because the data is so important as we start to move forward to cultivate that. So there are many different approaches, and I think we can talk about that a little bit more, as we start to do that. But one thing I will tell you beyond that, from a global perspective, employees expect their employers to have dedicated specific efforts around DEI initiatives. They're expecting that. They're expecting it to be customized to where they're located and what their cultures are. So I think that we have lots of different trends that go across, all of what we're doing, not just in the US, but from a global perspective as well. But a lot of consideration needs to be taken into account on where those employees are located, what that culture looks like, and what's the best fit for targeted outcomes as we start to move forward.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. As we transition now, we've talked a little bit about the current state. We've talked a little bit about the resistance that we're experiencing in different avenues, and how organizations are approaching addressing the DEI. Let's talk about how do we implement the right approach to addressing some of those things. So, Marlon, back to you for a second. What should be considered when approaching DEI awareness or strategy within an organization?
It's a great question, Matt. When we think about DEI awareness, we try to keep in mind that DEI awareness exists on a spectrum and is largely informed by our personal experiences and background. So when we try to create learning experience for people to connect, we try to build on-ramps to the discussion that provide points for people at all points of that spectrum to contribute and participate in the conversation. The other thing we try to keep in mind in terms of DEI awareness is the importance of having humility and grace for ourselves and others. I think Hanif mentioned earlier that the language is constantly evolving, different acronyms, right? We are imperfect beings. It's impossible to be perfect all the time, but rather what we should focus on is our self-awareness, being mindful of how we interact and connect with others. And when we make a mistake, own it, hold ourselves accountable, and try to do better in the future.
Yes, and I think that starting point is critical for the organization to even grow beyond that. Hanif, what's usually missed by leaders, or what are those areas that need more attention when creating a plan for DEI?
Wow, there's a few of them. I do want to double down on what Merlin just said around just mindfulness and what it means to create an environment within the workspace where it is safe to actually learn. Where it's I think anytime we're advancing equity and inclusion, an organization must be willing to position itself as a learner. I just really fundamentally believe that
Mhm.
when we're talking about the amount of cross-cultural engagement that we're doing, the different belief systems, people are going to make mistakes. And in the current state right now of DNI, it feels like you can't make a mistake. It feels like any mistake you make is just grounds for a call out one way or the other. So on one hand, I think leaders really, I think, underestimate how nervous people are to make mistakes, to speak their truth, even responsibly, and thinking about what does it mean to create learning spaces, or create a work environment where people feel comfortable trying on new ways of doing things, try on learning language that may be different than theirs, trying different approaches to leadership, and where mistakes happen but can be learned from. And I think connected to that, if I was thinking about two things that come up to me around big misses, and I see it here, is this idea of accountability. The number of times I've now been called in over the last 2 years to say, can you support us on just some basic accountability? Like, what does accountability actually even mean? If I look
Mhm.
across any C-suite and said, what does accountability mean on this team? I would get a number of different answers. And so what does accountability mean? How does it live? What does it mean to be accountable in my role to DEI and on our teams, whether it's a C-suite, whether it's an equity team within an organization, whether it's mid-managers, do we feel comfortable holding each other accountable? Is there process to hold each other accountable? And most always, all of that is just completely missing. Accountability tends to be one thing, which means I'm going to get in trouble for doing something, or I'm going to get called out one way or the other. So I see and I hear this on almost any assessment. We want leaders to be more accountable. We want mid-managers to be more accountable, but we have zero working definition around that, zero
Right.
process that often position accountability is something that can be empowering or put us back into right relationship. Most often it's really punitive. And so I think those two things, and finally with accountability, I will say that, especially in the US, I'll speak on the US side, part of how accountability gets wrapped up in D&I is it lives within one person, a D&I kind of lead. And almost always when I go to organizations, the most unhappy person in an organization is the D&I person. I just feel like they're constantly struggling, and we've often positioned these people to be accountable for D&I, but hold no authority over key stakeholders on how they integrate or address D&I within their spheres of influence,
Mhm.
and lacking kind of the resource or the positionality to kind of really move initiatives forward. So I really think I think leaders often think, okay, we're gonna resource DNI, put a DNI person in charge of this. We're not gonna really think about what it means to set up DNI to be really successful. So some of it is culturally that they've to learn. Some of it is how leaders hold it or key stakeholders hold it. And some of it is even how we resource it. I think all of those, I mean, we could go on and on, but I think some of those things around accountability and learning just kind of come to the forefront just in this conversation for me.
And that really is where the broader culture starts to change when I have the accountability in me to say, we don't do that here, or we do this here instead. In working in a healthy culture, that's been my experience. So, Kelly, as you listen to Merlin and Hanif offer their thoughts on this, what does a DEI plan for organizational growth look like?
Right. And I think it's really important that we talk about a growth mindset, right? A growth mindset combined with continuous learning, because that is the foundation as we look at things across the board. You can have the best framework in place, and and I'll talk a little bit about that, but at the same time, it's that cultural evolution that we've been talking about, on the webinar today, and how important that is and moving forward. So, when we look about performance improvement and training, it's all hand in hand with the change, with the mindset. How are we going to move forward? How are we going to do this? Because it's on all levels. And so stated that employees need a safe environment, so they can learn. And, you can fail at the same time, like with simulations and a lot of different things, but where they feel safe to do this. Because we've seen so many different areas where they don't feel safe. But there, so if you're thinking about and you're going through that, how do you move forward from a strategic perspective? There are certain things that are coming up, like a framework, a typical framework, like, make sure that you're aligning to your vision, and you're building, a fact base with identifying your potential around data points and building on facts, and developing an inclusive plan. Now, the plan itself needs to be inclusive across the board with different stakeholders. So not only are you looking at from a geography perspective, but you're also looking from a department perspective. You're looking at from a role perspective. You're even going back to the KPIs and your decision points around your continuous learning. You're mobilizing capabilities and even resources. I think, and the measurement aspect of it is huge, right? So if we're looking at what does that look like to not only sustain, but to scale. And sometimes scaling doesn't really become part of plans. They think it's a part of the plan, but when you actually start to build out how to scale it, people get a little, take a step back, like we haven't even started, or we're being able to do that. So I think sustainability and scaling are so important when you're thinking about building out. And the plan itself, it will be flexible. It will be a living document. You will need to define it, after maybe some projects that you've completed. Go back and look at your plan. When you have leadership that has gone through training or change of leadership, revisit it again. There are so many different things that impact, your strategy. And when the business changes, here's the thing, when the business changes or evolves, you need to look at your plan again. You need to have that as a growing document that mirrors business. So as we talk about learning and development, matching business goals, the same thing has to be in place with the DEI plan. So I think those are really important to take in consideration. And, there's other factors too to think about it. So it's not only once you have your plan, actually communicate your plan out, make sure that you're actually able to get feedback and growth and understanding where some of those areas of resistance are, continuously do learning. It's so vitally important. I can't even explain to you one of the major areas that organizations fail in on DEI is the initiatives around lack of continuous learning. I think those are very, very important. And I mean, there's other factors that go into with your diversity in your hiring process, ensuring that you're utilizing new standards and you're validating them back and you're collecting feedback without those different areas, but review regularly. This is really important. That plan itself will evolve, and it's not going to evolve. Don't visit yearly or quarterly. You need to be looking at a constant perspective. So I think those are some really good points to share when you're starting to thinking about strategically how to roll out a plan.
Such a good point. And as we think about aligning goals and aligning the organization around these values and learning about why it's important, how to do it, why to pay attention. Let's talk a little bit about DEI and learning strategy. And so I'll kick it off with you, Hanif. What should organizations consider when creating DEI training?
Again, I think at a balcony kind of level, I think there's a question organizations should be asking around, hey, what is the internal capacity that we want to develop to provide trainings within our own organization? And then where do we want to lean on partners because it's just what they do. And it makes things easier. And certainly we're in a number of organizations that are kind of just grappling with that. And then I think assessing within that, what are some of the long-term kind of ongoing training and learning needs that are just going to be there ongoingly? And then what are some of the more short-term training needs, and just being able to decipher that as it kind of organizes in the plan. And then within all of that, I think when we're thinking about training, for me, I think about three types of training. That's to me different than consulting or coaching or planning, when we think about strategic plans. But I think on one level, do we have within our organization a basic level of foundations training that builds common language within an organization, provides common framework so that everybody is kind of oriented from the same kind of place and is speaking the same kind of language. And digital is a great example of like a medium that helps provide that and socialize that across the board. And there's other ways to do that for sure. I also think that and this is maybe the most tricky of the work, I think, in all of that is the culture work. How do we create a sense of belonging where regardless of identity, people feel like they are seen, taken seriously, are thriving within the workspace? How do we navigate the change that D&I is suggesting in its efforts within organizations? How do we manage that kind of change? All the stuff on bias and all of that, I think is all embedded in really culture work, which I really want to just keep reiterating is ongoing work. I think that's just how are we constantly looking at the shifts in culture? How are we constantly tending to the diversity within our culture and making sure that people are really belonging and building structures within that to make sure that happens. And then finally, I think there's real capacity building need. So how do we build capacity of targeted stakeholders to really apply the principles, practices, and tools of D&I? Again, I double down on what Merlin said around the middle managers and the need is such a great example of just like the make or break and the need to really build capacity of that's a great example of a targeted group who really can skill up in this area and oftentimes aren't resourced or given the learning opportunities to really think about what does it mean to manage or supervise to a diverse population? Or how do I recognize how my own biases are showing up and how I do a performance assessment or how I do a supervision session or ongoing or any of that kind of stuff. And so I think there are a myriad of groups within an organization that really are wanting to figure out, hey, how do I actually do this? What does it actually look like in my job? And I think making sure that when we're doing training, we're really recognizing, hey, what's really needed or how do we organize our efforts so that this is available in one variation or the other to our employee base.
Great point. And Marlon, from your perspective, what types of training do you see working best for DEI?
We've seen a really positive impact when training includes these three elements. One would be cohort-based learning that extends beyond a one-time learning event. Studies show that less than 20% of the information is retained from a single training event. So it has to be ongoing. And when you do this within the context of small cohorts, the conversation is much deeper, much richer, and the support that you see among peers and the accountability that occurs from the small group conversations is extremely helpful. And also what we see is relationships get stronger through that cohort process. And those relationships, the quality of relationships translates into the work environment. So you get a positive impact there. The other thing that is important is to build learning journeys where there's application opportunities for learners to take the knowledge, the tools, the skills that they've learned, apply them in a real practical way, and then come back and speak about it with their peers. Talk about what went well, what could have been better, and then get a feedback from the facilitator as well. And then last but not least is a blended learning model. Online learning provides the flexibility that learners need, the scalability that organizations need. And online learning also provides an opportunity for just-in-time learning. For example, bias reviews happen every year. And if you think about sitting out a micro course about managing bias during the performance review to all your managers right before the bias reviews are about to happen, that can make a tremendous impact. So online delivery allows that. And then when you combine that with facilitated training discussions, it's so vitally important when we're talking about these conversations and topics around DEI. You need to have that conversation, that opportunity to connect with others and learn and hear their perspectives as well. And I guess there's one more thing. I think it's important to customize the experience based upon the talent segment that the individual is in, right? Leaders, managers need different skills and tools than individual contributors. So I think as much as you can customize the learning journey so that the learners can see themselves in it and apply specifically the tools that they've learned to their role and responsibilities, the impact will be far greater.
Thank you for that, Merlin. And what's striking me as we've been having this conversation today is that DEI as a topic, as a focus, as a need within our culture, it really doesn't differ from any other of our core business needs. It just has such wide-ranging implications. So Kelly, what are the technology innovations that are driving DEI, and what kinds of technology formats can really help move that forward and are successful?
Definitely. And I think what we just heard is incredibly important. I think I mentioned continuous learning as a huge factor in what we're doing, having the human factor a part of what we're doing. So it's not 100% automated, but it's really focused on adult learning theory with the multi generations that are in the business as we move forward. But there are tools that are in place that help it. DEI training doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to be like compliance, and there are ways to cause engagement or invoke engagement for the learners so they're more actively involved with what they're doing, right? How are we demonstrating that? How are we demonstrating cognitive retention in any medium that we're actually sharing, with different groups? And as long as you're building your learning based upon sound principles and ensuring, like even at EI with our emotional intelligence, everything that we touch has that a part of it. And I think a lot of times when learning gets developed, we're forgetting what that learning theory needs to be involved in and how it needs to be designed, not only to and look at ROI at the end, but also what is the learning experience, right? So it's not just a journey. So there's lots of different things that can be done. We work with so many different organizations from a global perspective, and a lot of what we develop is scenario based and enabling that learner to be in that moment of need, in the flow of work. So it's a realistic, when it comes to like scenario based, doing smaller, more impactful things, even from a gamification perspective, short, impactful areas that enable learners to be in a safe environment, demonstrating different techniques, and then being able to work more strategically for the outcomes that are coming in that. Interactive videos are huge. Even AI-based videos are being able to see realistic, immediate responses to learning in the need, in the moment specifically. So from even micro learning, small enabled areas that we can take a look at. Norland talked about blended learning. It's so important to have that human factor input back on that. But social learning too is a huge medium. And we've worked with everything from nonprofits for equality in the workplace to, International Institute for Global Partnership for Fighting Poverty. And we create, there not only a story-based approach, but embedding the micro learning, embedded gamification through that. And we're seeing huge amounts of the scenario-based as we're doing that. So there's a lot of different approaches. And I think some other things to think about are some of the newer things that are in the market. So for an example, like artificial intelligence to identify company bias. So there's AI tools out there now that are enabling organizations to take a look at that, whether it's job reviews or, taking a look at the process that are in place to be able to manage it more effectively. And then also platforms, like data-driven people intelligent platforms. These AI tools measures and tracks, DI initiatives. And it allows users to actually track their own, have the goals and collect the data for and a total engagement. And then we go beyond that with like, ChatGPT-4 with accessibility, which we didn't even come to terms on, when we were looking at accessibility is huge right now for being able to ensure that all learners can learn in a very effective way. So we have segmented not only understanding DEI as a company-wide initiative for every level, high, middle and low, but also the individual learners is something that needs to be focused on, how are they learning? What is being worked on? Do they have accessibility? Is it really set up in a way that they can enable them to learn in a more proactive means? So there's a lot of tools, a lot of good things on the market as well. And there are so many new ways to do things that cut down the learning curve and also the cycle and comprehension to ensure that employees are actually able to apply what they learned very quickly to their job roles. So I'll end at that. I know, Matt, that we're coming right on the QA side of it, but post the webinar, we will be able to give out, you'll talk about the handouts, but also we have case studies to showcase what does that look like, how ROI is actually a part. I saw in the chat, can D&I initiatives have ROI associated with it? Absolutely. It's imperative because, ways to be able to show what the outcome of your DEI initiatives are, it's just a major factor in it. So it's not only all of the areas that need to be it, but it's also the tools that you're using that are the most proactive. And now ways we're able to do that in a very streamlined and a very, very effective manner.
Excellent. Thanks, Kelly. There really is so much to unpack here. So we are disciplining ourselves to stay focused in a couple of areas. Today, we're going to move to our Q&A time. Reminder that you can use that Q&A function in the Zoom window to submit some questions. We've got a couple to get us started. So this first one I think could be a webinar in and of itself, but in a global organization, can a one-size-fits-all DEI strategy work? Or should one develop separate DEI strategies per location? Who wants to take a crack at that one?
I'll take a crack at that one. How about that? So we have several global reports, and I'll be happy to share that out, that DEI initiatives in totality, not just training, but all initiatives, is projected to be at $15 billion by 2026. That's from McKinsey. That means that, and it's a global. So best recommendations for creating a global plan is to take a look at all your different locations. One size fit all does not work. And the reason for that is because there's so many different cultures within locations that need the focus specifically to ensure that they're successful. Now that these different locations obviously roll up into a master plan that you're able to measure in totality, but please, please, please know that it has to be localized. It has to be from a culture perspective, from an understanding, from a personal journey perspective. It all goes hand in hand to ensure that an international company is successful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Even within just the United States, we're working with the national organization, it's a network, kind of the network organization. And the reality is, what and how D&I issues are living in the South in the United States is very different than where we are in the Northwest. And if we applied the same strategies to advance this work that we're doing in the North, the exact same strategies that we're doing in the Northwest, down in the South or in the Northeast, whatever it may be. So even within any large system, there may be various needs, different disparities that are needing to be addressed. And I think a good equity plan has that flexibility to it. I mean, it's sitting under a set of core values of inclusion and equal access and opportunity, all of that. And the strategies around how you go about creating that for folks may look fundamentally different based on the needs of a region or country or even within a particular municipality in certain moments.
And completely agree with what Kelly and Hanif just said in terms of localizing the strategy. And to add to that, I think one of the benefits of localizing the strategy is it increases accountability and ownership, right? If you have a set of DEI principles that are universal across, and then you allow the stakeholders at each location to look at their specific organizational needs and customize their strategy based on what's unique to them and what they need, but fits under the overarching umbrella of the organization. I think those will create the most success.
Very good. And Kelly, the figure you mentioned was, I think, 15 billion expected.
Correct.
Projected
Correct.
spend. 15 billion. So someone wanted to clarify that. So one other question that has come in is, how do you go about gathering data in countries where certain demographic information can't be gathered?
You can even do that just from a location perspective, right? So I'll add comments. I don't know if anyone of you want to address that.
I don't, for us, you could do that in any location. I don't know if we have any absolute solution around that where we're capturing, there's certain identities that we're wanting to capture that people are reluctant just to identify. There's just sometimes people's mistrust of assessments, of who's actually going to read the assessment, and so I think, on our end, we've done the best we can to kind of capture and work within the data group that's there, and just recognize that there may be gaps in how we're collecting data, and just kind of honor that in one particular way or the other. There's definitely informal ways, whether it's focus groups or and those kinds of things that can capture diverse experiences, and oftentimes that sometimes can be a little easier ways to kind of capture, if that's what we're wanting from a demographic, not just like the percentage of this group or that group, but actually the experiences of diverse groups. Sometimes focus groups and those kinds of things can offer a little more safe way for folks to be able to capture that. But It's a great question, and I think an ongoing challenge for us for sure.
Absolutely an ongoing challenge. And I think in those opportunities, there's an opportunity to double down on the principles of equity and inclusion. One of the things that we look at it is if you create an inclusive and equitable environment, the outcome of that is your ability to attract and retain talented people from all different backgrounds.
And I think to add to this as well, so there are different techniques that can be done, and it goes back to having that initiative around a culture of understanding and trust, right? So, having worked with so many different locations from a global perspective, even like working in some of the remote areas in South Africa or some of the other ones where it's really hard. So there's numerous reasons why you can't gather the data, right? It doesn't exist. It's not accessible. People aren't willing to share that. There are several techniques that we currently use that enable us to gather some more data, from the informal perspective as well. But when you standardize your approach from those core areas, one size doesn't fit all, but your approach with it, like at least a 20% variation when you're dealing with your different locations, there's certain core data that you can pull out that becomes the foundation of what you're doing. And I'd be more than happy, post this call, Matt, to send additional information out to the participants, because we will be answering any additional questions that we have to give you kind of like best practices of what we're seeing, what's worked well. And then maybe that might be able to help what you're looking at or your initiative or your strategy moving forward with that. So we can definitely offer to do that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. Some really great insights being shared here. We are closing in on the end of our time together. Thank you again to our panel, to Kelly Lake, Hanif Fazal, and Merlin Pope for your expertise and insight. So I'm going to pause here quickly and let my colleague Shay Salvato give away some money.
Yes, thank you so much, Matt. So before we wrap up today's workshop session, I would like to announce the lucky winner of our raffle. Congratulations to Lisa Ajadenbi on winning today's prize, a $100 Amazon gift card. We will be sending you an e-card shortly to celebrate your win. Congratulations, Lisa.
Congratulations, and thank you for being here. And thank all of you for being here as well. EI does offer several thought leadership assets on these important topics, including an ebook on building inclusive excellence and creating path-breaking learning that is accessible to all. The links to download those will be available in the handouts that will be provided to everyone today, along with a link to the recording of this session. We thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you, Merlin. Thank you, Hanif. Thank you, Kelly. And we hope everyone has a good rest of the day or evening, wherever your journey takes you. Have a great day.